I was once the most dazzling scalpel in the medical field, until my fiancé, Aaron, personally broke my wings. He held the tearful Iris, and shoved the scalpel into my hand. "Serena," he said, his voice as gentle as a love whisper. "Either you cripple your right hand yourself, or tomorrow you'll be collecting your brother's corpse." Later, when his sister's brain aneurysm ruptured, he knelt like a stray dog at the operating room door. "Please save her. I'll give you anything you want." I slowly raised my right wrist, still wrapped in bandages, letting him see the hideous scar. "Mr. Aaron," my voice was as calm as a frozen lake. "Look carefully, this hand was crippled by you. Now even God can't save your sister." The cold white light of the operating lamp stung my eyes. Standing for 8 consecutive hours, my mind was highly focused, like a taut string. Lying on the operating table was an important figure in the country, with a vascular tumor near the brainstem, in a location so tricky it was infuriating. No more than 3 people in the country dared to accept, and were confident in completing this surgery. And I, Serena, was the one with the highest success rate. Sweat soaked the hair on my forehead under the sterile cap, but my right hand, holding the scalpel, was as steady as a rock. The subtle touch of my fingertips was transmitted to my brain through the instrument, every movement precise to the micrometer. Dissection, hemostasis, suturing. Like a ballet danced on a knife's edge. Finally, the last suture was completed, and the vital signs on the monitor stabilized. I let out a sigh that was almost imperceptible. "Surgery successful," I announced, my voice hoarse with exhaustion. The assistants and nurses cast admiring glances at me. I knew that, barring any accidents, my name would be on the medical news headlines again tomorrow. Brain surgery maestro Serena creates another miracle. Walking out of the operating room, the suppressed feeling of fatigue came crashing down like a tidal wave. Leaning against the cold wall, I just wanted to quickly change out of this surgical gown and collapse on my soft bed at home. Maybe Aaron would be waiting for me at home. He was the director of this hospital, and also my boyfriend of 3 years. We would have some red wine together, celebrating another life I had snatched from the hands of death. He would embrace me as usual and say, "Serena, you are my pride." Thinking of him, the corners of my mouth unconsciously lifted in a warm smile. "Sister Serena, you worked hard." A delicate voice interrupted my thoughts. I looked up and saw Iris standing not far away, looking graceful in her white coat. She was also a neurologist, joining the hospital a few years later than me, and was handpicked by Aaron. As her name suggested, she was gentle and graceful, the dream girl of many male doctors in the hospital. "Dr. Iris still not off work?" I nodded lightly, maintaining basic politeness. For some reason, I could never be close to her. Perhaps it was the way she looked at Aaron, always with a hint of subtle dependence, waiting for Aaron to discuss something. She smiled innocently. "He said he wanted to celebrate for me tonight. My independently completed glioblastoma surgery was very successful." My heart sank slightly. Aaron hadn't mentioned having plans tonight. Moreover, the surgery that Iris completed independently wasn't top-notch, far from requiring the director to celebrate in person. "Is that so?" I maintained my composure. "Then have a good celebration. I'll go back first." "Sister Serena, aren't you waiting for Aaron to go together?" She blinked her innocent eyes. Did Aaron forget to tell you?" "Don't blame him, he's been too busy lately." These words sounded considerate, but were like a tiny thorn, stabbing into my heart. "No. Imtirat." I didn't want to say more, and turned to walk towards the locker room. The phone was as quiet as if it were broken. Aaron didn't send a word. After changing clothes, I walked out of the hospital gate. The night breeze was cool, dispelling the last trace of my drowsiness. A strange unease, like vines, quietly wrapped around me. I took out my phone and dialed Aaron's number. It rang for a long time unanswered. Then I dialed my brother Jeremy's number. He was studying abroad, and should just be getting up at this time. Similarly unanswered. The unease in my heart gradually grew. Although Jeremy was sometimes playful, he would never not answer my calls, especially on days when I had just completed a major surgery. He would definitely call to ask how I was. I forced myself to calm down. Maybe the phone was just out of battery, or he was in class. Returning to the apartment that Aaron and I shared, it was chillingly desolate. He wasn't there as expected. I sat on the sofa, dialing those 2 unanswered numbers over and over again, until my fingers were stiff. At 1 o'clock in the morning, there was finally a sound at the door. Aaron came back, smelling of alcohol. But he wasn't alone. Iris was supporting him, their posture ambiguous. "Sister Serena? You're still awake?" Iris's face flashed with panic when she saw me, but it was quickly replaced by a hidden smugness. Aaron's arm was intimately draped over her shoulder. My blood instantly ran cold. "Where have you been?" I stood up, my voice shaking uncontrollably. Aaron pushed Iris away, walked unsteadily towards me, his face devoid of any remorse, instead wearing a coldness and aversion I had never seen before. "Waiting for you to explain." I stared at him. "Explain?" He scoffed and tugged at his tie. "Serena, what right do you have to make me explain?" I was stunned. Was this the man who had held me yesterday and told me he loved me? "Brother Aaron drank too much, Sister Serena, don't mind." Iris took a step forward, seemingly trying to smooth things over, but her tone was laced with boasting. "We just had dinner with a few medical equipment suppliers, and talked about the new project I'll be leading next." I ignored her, and just looked at Aaron. "Where's Jeremy? Why isn't he answering the phone?" Aaron's eyes flickered for a moment, then turned gloomy. "Your brother? How would I know?" Iris, however, gently, I had covered her mouth and her eyes darted around. "Sister Serena, don't you know yet? Jeremy. He seems to have had some trouble abroad." My heart contracted violently. "What trouble?" It seems he went out to a party last night and encountered a street shooting. Now, his whereabouts are unknown." As she spoke, she carefully observed Aaron's expression. With a bang, my brain went blank. Missing? Shooting? I rushed forward and grabbed Aaron's arm. "You know, don't you? You must know. Speak." Aaron violently shook me off, with such force that I staggered backward. "So what if I know?" He looked down at me, his eyes filled with bone-chilling coldness. "Serena, you can barely protect yourself now, and you still have the mind to care about others?" "Others? That's my brother." I almost screamed. "Soon he won't be." His tone was calm, but every word was like a stab. "Unless you do as I say." Iris stood behind him, the corners of her mouth curling into an almost imperceptible sneer. I felt ice cold all over, a huge fear gripping me. "What do you want me to do?" Aaron took a scalpel as thin as a willow leaf from his suit pocket, the type I usually used, the blade gleaming with a cold light under the lamp. He threw it on the coffee table in front of me. "Use this to sever the tendons in your right wrist." His voice was unwavering. "I want you to never be able to hold a scalpel again in your life." Time seemed to freeze. I looked at him in disbelief, as if I was meeting this man for the first time. The man I had loved for 3 years, the man I had trusted and relied on with all my heart, was now casually demanding that I destroy my life's work. Destroy this pair of hands that countless people had praised as the hands of God. Why? My voice was as dry as sandpaper rubbing. Because Iris needs the title of brain surgery maestro. He reached out and pulled Iris into his arms, the movement natural and intimate. "Your existence is blocking her path." Iris leaned against him, timidly saying, "Brother Aaron, don't force Sister Serena like this. Maybe there's another way." "This is the fastest and most effective way." Aaron interrupted her, his eyes filled with impatience as he looked at me. "Serena, you have no choice. Either you do it yourself, and I guarantee I'll use all my connections to find Jeremy as soon as possible, alive or dead. Or—" He paused, and the corners of his mouth curved into a cruel arc. "You can just wait to collect your brother's corpse. Oh, perhaps you won't even be able to find the body." Iris pretended to advise. "Sister Serena, just listen to Aaron. It's just one hand. What is it compared to your brother's life? You can't do surgery anymore. You can switch to teaching. I will take your place and continue to shine on the operating table." Shine? Looking at her hypocritical face, looking at Aaron's cold and merciless eyes, a huge grief and anger almost tore me apart. My hands had saved countless lives, including his, Aaron's, precious little sister, Haley. Last year, Haley suddenly suffered a cerebral hemorrhage, and her condition was critical. I stood for over 10 hours, pulling her back from the brink of death. At that time, Aaron held my hand, sobbing uncontrollably, and said that I was the greatest benefactor in his life. It turned out kindness was so cheap. It turned out love was so laughable. Aaron, I heard my voice tremble, yet it was unusually clear. I saved your sister. A flash of complexity crossed his eyes, but it was quickly replaced with disgust. Don't mention Haley. That's what you're supposed to do as a doctor. Now choose. I knew he wasn't joking. He wouldn't be where he was today if he played fair. Jeremy was overseas, his life truly hung on his whim. My brother, my only family in this world. Our parents died early, and I worked part-time to raise him, sending him abroad, hoping for a bright future. My hand and Jeremy's life. This choice was suffocatingly cruel. The rain beat against the window, like countless needles stabbing my heart. I slowly bent down and picked up the cold scalpel. On the handle, there seemed to linger the warmth of my fingertips. I extended my right hand. This hand, once steady, precise, and the creator of countless medical miracles. Now I would end it myself. Aaron and Iris watched with cold eyes. In Iris's eyes, there was undisguised excitement and anticipation. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. When I opened them again, they were filled with lifelessness. The blade pressed precisely against the most vital tendons of my wrist. A sharp, intense pain surged, and blood gushed out instantly, staining my vision red. But I couldn't feel the pain really. The pain in my heart had already surpassed everything else. With the tendons severed, the scalpel fell to the ground with a clatter. My right hand hung limply in an unnatural position, completely ruined. Aaron seemed relieved and said coldly, "You're being sensible. I'll send someone to find Jeremy." Iris immediately stepped forward, feigning surprise, and exclaimed, "Sister Serena, why did you really?" "Quick, brother Aaron, call a doctor." But Aaron stopped her. "Call a doctor for what? She's a cripple, not worth wasting medical resources on." He put his arm around Iris and turned to leave. "Aaron." I used my last bit of strength to call out to him, looking at the glaring pool of red on the floor. "You'll regret this." He paused without turning around. Only cold words came. "Regret? Serena, you stood in Iris's way. You brought this on yourself. From today on, you're fired from the hospital. Good luck to you." They left together, leaving me alone in the blood-soaked room, feeling the joint death of my career and love. The rain outside the window fell even harder. The intense pain jolted me awake from my unconsciousness, or rather, the burning sensation of the wound and the chill in my heart prevented me from truly falling asleep. I lay on the cold floor, the wound on my right wrist haphazardly bandaged with torn bedsheets, the blood already soaked through the fabric, congealing into a dark red. Each heartbeat tugged at the tearing pain in my wrist, reminding me of the self-mutilation that had happened a few hours ago, a nightmare-like event. The apartment was empty. Aaron and Iris had long since left, leaving behind a messy room and a pungent smell of blood. They hadn't even called an ambulance, throwing me away like a piece of trash, leaving me here to fend for myself. A cripple, not worth wasting medical resources on. Aaron's words were like poisoned ice picks, repeatedly piercing my nerves. I struggled to sit up, cold sweat instantly covering my forehead. Leaning against the wall, I used my still functional left hand to laboriously pull out my phone. The screen was cracked, but still usable. Missed calls and messages flooded in. Some from colleagues concerned about the success of the surgery. Some from the media who heard the news and wanted to interview me. But more were from those who didn't know the truth and were asking about my sudden disappearance. None from Aaron. None from Iris. There was only one text message from an unknown number, short and cold. "Jeremy has been found, he's fine. Behave yourself." I stared at the text message, and suddenly wanted to burst out laughing. "He's fine. Behave yourself." How lightly he spoke. He used a fabricated threat to easily ruin my life, then told me he's fine, and told me to behave myself. What about my right hand? What about the career I valued as my life? Was it just going to be brushed aside so lightly? My left hand trembling, I dialed Jeremy's number. This time, the phone was answered almost immediately. "Cease." Jeremy's young and energetic voice came through, with a hint of urgency. "Are you okay? My phone was stolen a few days ago. I just replaced the SIM card. I called you so many times and couldn't get through. I was so scared." How was your surgery? Was it successful? Hearing my brother's familiar voice, all my strength instantly crumbled. Tears welled up, mixed with the bloodstains on my face, salty and desperate. I bit my lip hard, trying not to cry. Cease. Why aren't you talking? Are you okay? Jeremy's voice was even more worried. I'm okay. I tried my best to make my voice sound normal, but I couldn't help but choke. The surgery was very successful. I'm a little tired. It's good that you're okay. It's good that you're okay. Of course I'm okay. I just had bad luck and lost my phone. Sis, your voice doesn't sound right. Are you too tired? Get some rest. I'll come back to see you when my semester ends. What do you want to eat? I'll bring it to you. My brother's concerned words were like dull knives, slowly torturing my heart. I couldn't imagine how broken he would be if he knew the truth, that his bright future was exchanged for his sister's right hand, a hand once hailed as God's hand. I can't let him know. At least not now. Making up a few excuses, I hung up the phone in a hurry. Huge sadness and humiliation almost drowned me. Leaning against the wall, I slid down to the ground and wept silently. I don't know how long I cried, until the tears ran dry, leaving only numb pain. I knew I couldn't fall here. Aaron and Iris wouldn't let me go, and staying here would only lead to more humiliation. I have to leave. Supporting myself with my left hand, I struggled to get up. Every movement sent searing pain through my right wrist. I rummaged through the first aid kit at home, and using my left hand and teeth, cleaned the wound again, sprinkled on hemostatic powder, and rebandaged it simply. The movements were clumsy and slow, and sweat blurred my vision again and again. The hand that once could perform the most intricate surgeries now seemed so pathetic even bandaging itself. I packed a few essential clothes and documents, as well as all my savings. Not much. Most of the money was used to support Jeremy's studies abroad and our lives. I looked at the diamond ring that Aaron gave me last year as a birthday gift. A delicate ring he said was an engagement ring. I sneered and threw it into the trash can. Dragging my weak body and a ruined hand, I left this home that was once full of longing but now only filled with nightmares. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I rented a simple single room in a remote corner of the city, like a wounded beast, licking my wounds alone. The wound on my right wrist healed badly, because it didn't receive timely professional treatment. The tendons were torn, the nerves were damaged, and even if the wound healed later, this hand would never be able to regain its former flexibility and strength. It was destined to be just an ornament, a brand that constantly reminded me of my hatred. A few days later, I had to go to a small clinic to treat the infected wound. The doctor looked at my hideous wound and the obvious wounds caused by a sharp blade, his eyes complicated, but he didn't ask any more questions. Just as I was living like a walking corpse, news about me began to ferment online. First, the hospital officially released a statement saying that the famous neurosurgeon Serena Doctor could no longer engage in clinical work due to personal health reasons, and had voluntarily resigned. The statement was vague, but left unlimited room for imagination. Then various insiders began to reveal the truth. Some said that I had been under tremendous pressure for a long time and had mental problems. Some said that I relied on my talent and arrogance and offended people I shouldn't have, and was blacklisted by the industry. The most vicious saying was that I made a mistake in the recent important surgery, which led to serious sequelae for the patient, and I resigned out of shame. And the background noise of all these rumors was the high-profile rise of Iris. She frequently gave interviews, appeared on the covers of medical journals, and actively shared her successful surgical experience and inspirational life on social media. She skillfully guided public opinion, portraying herself as a new generation of brain surgeons who had replaced a declining predecessor with hard work and talent. In a highly anticipated live medical forum, the host asked about my retirement. Iris faced the camera, showing her usual gentle and slightly regretful expression. Sister Serena is my senior, and I respect her very much. She did achieve great things before. However, the field of medicine is rapidly updated, maybe. Well, some old technologies and ideas are out of date. In addition, she may have encountered some difficulties in her personal life, and chose to leave. Although it's a pity, maybe it's good for everyone. She paused, her voice even more sincere. As a colleague, I sincerely hope that Sister Serena can take good care of herself and get out of her difficulties. I will inherit the legacy, oh no, the spirit, of my predecessors, and continue to work hard in the field of neurosurgery to bring hope to more patients." The audience applauded thunderously. There was also a wave of praise online. Dr. Iris is so beautiful and kind. This is the true heart of a doctor, much better than that Serena who disappeared inexplicably. Times are progressing, survival of the fittest is normal, Dr. Iris deserves it. I heard that Serena's hand seems to have a problem. She can't even hold a scalpel steadily, no wonder she wants to hide. I sat in the dim rented room, swiping on my phone with my left hand, looking at Iris's hypocritical face, looking at those comments that reverse black and white, looking at Aaron occasionally appearing beside her, expressing his support for her as the director of the hospital. My heart felt like it was being clenched tightly by an invisible hand, suffocating pain. I didn't cry, I just felt cold, bone-chilling cold. I knew that Aaron was behind these public opinions. He wanted to completely trample me into the mud, making Iris's halo even more dazzling. My phone would occasionally ring, somewhere from past colleagues or media, wanting to explore the truth. Occasionally, I would go to the street to buy daily necessities. I wore a hat and mask, wrapping myself up tightly. But sometimes, I would still be recognized by some people. "Look, isn't that Serena? That's the doctor whose hand is ruined, right? TSK, so pitiful, she used to be so glamorous. What's there to pity? She must have had a problem herself, otherwise would Director Aaron have given her up?" Those gazes, whether sympathetic, contemptuous, or gloating, stabbed at me like needles. I learned to be expressionless, I learned to ignore. But when the night was quiet, looking at my right wrist, still wrapped in bandages and strangely shaped, that bone-deep hatred would grow wildly. "Aaron Iris, what you have taken, what you have destroyed, I will make you repay it 100-fold. However, I am just a cripple now. A cripple who can barely take care of herself. What do I have to take revenge?" I fell into a desperate confusion. Until one day, in the corner of a small bookstore, I saw an old book covered in dust, about left-handedness development and rehabilitation training. My heart suddenly beat faster. My right hand is ruined, but my left hand is still intact. A crazy, seemingly impossible idea quietly sprouted in my mind. Maybe there is still hope? No, not maybe. There must be hope. I bought that book, like grabbing the last straw, holding it tightly in my arms. The spark of revenge reignited in the ruins. The conditions of the rented room were worse than I imagined. The walls were mottled and peeling, and a musty smell permeated the humid air. I could hear every little sound from next door. But this was perfect, hidden enough and cheap enough to allow me to continue this hibernation of mine, which I didn't know when would end. The wound on my right wrist was slowly healing, leaving behind a hideous, twisted scar, like an ugly centipede, permanently perched there. But even more terrifying was the loss of function. My wrist was weak, my fingers couldn't perform delicate movements, I couldn't even make a fist. It had become a heavy, useless appendage, constantly reminding me of that betrayal and self-destruction. I couldn't let it be useless, at least, not completely a burden. I started basic rehabilitation exercises with my left hand, trying to get this useless hand to at least perform some simple auxiliary functions. But every attempt to move my fingers, involving the severed tendons, was excruciatingly painful. Progress was despairingly slow, but the real challenge lay in my left hand. I was naturally right-handed. My left hand had almost never taken on a main role, except for assisting. Now it had to shoulder everything. Eating, dressing, washing, writing. Everything I used to take for granted had become a difficult challenge. I picked up a spoon with my left hand, trembling like a Parkinson's patient. Half of the food I managed to scoop up spilled before I could even get it to my mouth. Buttoning my clothes was as clumsy as an infant. Often, it would take me more than 10 minutes to get a button through a buttonhole. Trying to write with my left hand, the letters were crooked and distorted, like demonic scribbles, unrecognizable even to myself. Frustration washed over me like a tide, engulfing me time and time again. Often, after a failed attempt, I would sit dejectedly on the floor, looking at these disobedient hands of mine, and fall into deep self-doubt. Could I really pick up a scalpel again? Even with my left hand? How could someone who had trouble taking care of themselves even think about returning to the operating table, which required extreme stability and precision? That night, once again, I spilled instant noodle soup all over myself while trying to eat a bowl with my left hand. The sticky soup dripped down my clothes, and the floor was a mess. The roar of a drunk and the cries of a woman came from next door, mixed with the noisy sounds of a variety show on TV. I slumped on the greasy floor, looking out at the cold lights of the city, gripped by a loneliness and despair I had never felt before. Maybe I should give up, find a place where no one knows me and live out the rest of my life like a rat, barely surviving. Anyway, I'm already a cripple. Jeremy is safe, and I have nothing to worry about anymore. Just then, the drunk next door seemed to be having trouble with the TV signal, and started flipping channels frantically. A familiar, affected voice suddenly pierced through the thin walls and came in. It was Iris. I jerked my head up. The drunk must have landed on a news channel. A grand medical award ceremony was being broadcast live on TV. A huge backdrop read Annual Medical Contribution Award. And standing on the center of the stage, holding a crystal trophy and smiling triumphantly, was Iris. She was wearing a haute couture gown, her makeup was exquisite, and her hair was perfectly in place. Under the spotlight, she looked like a true darling of fortune. And standing beside her, personally handing her the trophy, was Aaron. He was wearing a well-tailored suit, still handsome, with a restrained and satisfied smile on his face. The way he looked at Iris was full of admiration and adoration? That was the look I used to be so familiar with, but now it made me want to retch. The host, in an exaggerated tone, introduced Iris's remarkable achievements, especially the several challenging neurosurgeries she had recently successfully completed, calling her a rising star in the field of neurosurgery and a well-deserved neurosurgical master. Iris took the microphone, her voice still gentle and pleasant, with just the right amount of humility. Thank you very much to the organizing committee for giving me this honor. Actually, I owe my achievements today to my dean, Mr. Aaron. The camera immediately zoomed in on Aaron, who nodded slightly with impeccable grace. Iris continued. It was Aaron's trust and support that gave me the greatest stage. At the same time, I would also like to thank my predecessors. Especially Dr. Serena. She suddenly mentioned my name, causing my heart to clench. A hint of just the right amount of regret appeared on her face. Serena has left her beloved post due to health reasons. We are all saddened by this. As her junior, I will carry on her love and pursuit of medicine, and continue to work hard to live up to everyone's expectations. Loud applause erupted from the audience. The online broadcast was flooded with comments. Dr. Iris is amazing. Well deserved. Such a broad perspective. She even mentioned her predecessor. She's so beautiful and kind-hearted. Dean Aaron and Dr. Iris look so good together. A match made in heaven. That Serena should have stepped aside long ago. Dr. Iris is the real neurosurgical master. Ah, that's right. Serena, that waste, is probably picking up garbage in some corner somewhere now. The drunk next door seemed to be infected by the atmosphere, and was shouting at the TV, accompanied by a lewd laugh. On TV, Aaron naturally put his arm around Iris's shoulders, and the two smiled brightly at the camera, looking like a perfect couple. The image was harmonious and jarring. And I, sitting on the cold, dirty floor, covered in stains, my right hand crippled, my left hand unable to even hold a bowl of noodles steady, was like a rat in the gutter, peering at the brilliance of others in the dark. Intense hatred surged and boiled in my chest like magma. It was about to burst through my body. Not sadness, not grievance, but pure hatred, enough to incinerate everything. Aaron. Iris. You climbed to the top on my flesh and blood, my career, my dignity, accepting the worship and praise of the crowd. You turned me into a monster, neither human nor ghost, and then lightly say regret? You took everything from me, yet you won't even give me a quiet corner. You use your success to torment me at all times. No way. I leaped to my feet and rushed to the broken little TV, slamming it off. Iris's false smile and Aaron's cold eyes instantly disappeared. Silence fell in the room. Only my heavy breathing and the drunk's muffled curses next door. I walked to the only clean wall in the room, the one where I had posted my rehabilitation plan. Now I tore that plan down. I picked up a thick black marker with my left hand. My knuckles turned white from the effort, and the pen tip dug deeply into the wall. I wrote 2 words stroke by stroke, with all my strength, on the mottled wall. Aaron. Then Iris. These 2 names were like 2 hideous scars, etched on the wall, and also etched into my bones. I took a step back, looked at these 2 names, and my chest heaved violently. Then I raised my trembling, weak left hand and pointed it at the names on the wall. My voice was hoarse, but with an almost insane determination, I vowed, word by word. I, Serena, hereby swear. The humiliation of today, the vengeance for my severed wrist, the hatred for my stolen career. I will repay you 100-fold in the future with the things you fear and cherish the most. One day, I will pick up a scalpel again with this left hand. I will stand higher than you, and watch you with my own eyes. Fall into disgrace. Descend into hell. My voice echoed in the small space, carrying a desperate and terrifying power. After saying all this, I leaned weakly against the wall, but my eyes were no longer lost. Hatred had become the only driving force that sustained me. From that day on, I threw away all self-pity and despair. I devised a stricter, more insane training plan. My left hand couldn't hold a spoon steady? Then I would start with picking up beans. Soybeans, mung beans, red beans. I bought all kinds of beans and spent hours every day, trembling, picking them up one by one with chopsticks and putting them into another bowl. The beans fell countless times, and I bent down to pick them up countless times. The skin on my fingers wore away, formed scabs, and wore away again. My left hand was weak. Then I would practice grip strength. I squeezed a sponge with my left hand, squeezed a rubber ball, and even went to find discarded surgical instruments to practice the feeling of gripping them repeatedly. I scoured all the books and materials I could find on left-handed training, neurological rehabilitation, and even skills training for the disabled, absorbing all possible knowledge like a parched sponge. I knew it was difficult, almost impossible. But whenever I wanted to give up, the 2 names on the wall, Iris's false smile on TV, Aaron's cold eyes, and the hideous scar on my wrist, would whip me like a lash, making me stand up again. The days passed slowly in monotony and pain. I was like a hermit, isolated from the world, focused on only one thing: to restore to my left hand the power to control my destiny. Outside the window, Iris's fame grew, and Aaron's hospital prospered. They lived in the spotlight, dazzling and brilliant. And I lived in the dark corner of the slum, living with pain, clumsiness, and hatred. But I knew that hibernation was for a more deadly attack. Aaron, Iris, laugh all you want. The day my left hand can pick up a scalpel again, I will make you unable to even cry. Time passed in my day after day left-handed training, like sand through my fingers, impossible to grasp or hold back. In the blink of an eye, it was late autumn. The leaves of the plane trees outside the window were yellowing and falling, just like my seemingly lifeless situation. My left hand, after countless tremors, failures, worn-out skin, scabbing and wearing away again, was finally beginning to show a trace of taming. Picking up beans no longer scattered all over the floor. I could eat with a spoon relatively steadily, and even write barely recognizable words. But for surgery that required microscopic precision, this was far from enough. I knew I needed more professional, more brutal training. I had almost cut off contact with the outside world. The only sources of news were a broken radio and the occasional expired medical magazines I bought at the corner newsstand. Like a traveler in the desert thirsting for sweet water, I greedily drew the latest news from the medical world, especially about neurosurgery, about Aaron's hospital, about Iris. In the magazines, Iris was even more prominent. She was portrayed as an almost perfect image of genius, hard work, and kindness. She attended various high-end forums, gave forward-looking speeches, which, in my opinion, were mostly flashy and lacked a solid clinical foundation. But the media and the public bought it. They needed a hero, and Iris had been packaged as that hero. Aaron's figure also often appeared in the reports. He always stood by Iris's side as a supporter and talent scout. The golden couple had become the hospital's best publicity banner. Everything seemed so beautiful, so natural. Until one day, in the corner of the social news section of an expired newspaper, I saw an inconspicuous report. The sister of the director of a famous neurosurgical hospital's condition worsens, and a young life is in danger. The accompanying photo was a somewhat blurry picture of Aaron and a young girl in a hospital gown. The girl was wearing a hat and had a pale face, but her smile was still bright. It was Haley. My heart sank. The report was very short, saying only that Haley's brain cancer had recurred, that her condition was not optimistic, and that she was receiving treatment at Aaron's hospital, where the hospital had organized the strongest team of experts to do everything possible to save her life. Haley. That warm, sunny girl. I remembered her playfully calling me Sister Serena, and her sincerity when she gave me homemade cookies after she recovered. She was Aaron's sister, and the one I had once done everything I could to pull back from the brink of death. My hatred for Aaron was overwhelming, but Haley was innocent. A sense of foreboding enveloped me. Based on my understanding of Haley's previous condition, the recurring tumor must be in an extremely dangerous location. Sure enough, in a few days, more details about Haley's condition began to circulate in small circles. I learned more definite news from a nurse who used to be on good terms with me, and had now left the hospital. Haley's tumor was growing near the brainstem in a location known as the surgical forbidden zone, compressing important nerves and blood vessels. The tumor itself was irregularly shaped and closely adhered to the surrounding tissue. Top national experts had held multiple consultations, and the conclusion was shockingly consistent. The surgery was extremely risky, the success rate was extremely low, and she might not even make it off the operating table. Conservative treatment might prolong her life for a few months, but ultimately, this meant that Haley had almost been sentenced to death. I could imagine Aaron's anxiety and despair. His parents had died early, and he only had this one sister, whom he cherished like a treasure. He could use every means to pave the way for my downfall, but he could not use power and money to snatch his sister's life back from the god of death. Just then, a medical interview program on the radio mentioned Haley's condition. After the host introduced the situation in a heavy tone, he changed the subject. It is reported that, faced with such a severe challenge, Aaron's hospital has not given up. Dr. Iris, hailed as the new generation's brain surgery prodigy, has volunteered to take on the challenge and perform surgery on Miss Haley. This decision demonstrates the benevolence and fearless commitment of medical professionals. Let us all pray for the success of the surgery. Iris? She's going to operate on Haley? I almost sneered. I know Iris's skill level too well. She's certainly got some cleverness, she's good at maneuvering, and her basic skills are solid, but she lacks the real experience to deal with complex and difficult surgeries, and that almost instinctive precision. Those successful surgeries she's lauded for were either exaggerated in difficulty, or had senior assistants safeguarding her. Letting her lead an operation on Haley's tumor, located in the forbidden zone, is nothing short of reckless endangerment. That location, that degree of adhesion and risk, even in my prime, would require all my focus and be like walking on thin ice. I wouldn't dare say the success rate would be 100%. Iris? She doesn't even have a 30% chance. She's gambling. Using Haley's life to bet on her own reputation and status. If she succeeds, she'll become a legend in one fell swoop, completely solidifying her title as a brain surgery prodigy, and might even use it to tie Aaron down firmly. If she fails. No, she probably hasn't even considered failure, or she thinks that even if she fails, Aaron won't do anything to her. Stupid. Insane. I sat in the dim room, unconsciously kneading a steel ball I use for practice with my left hand, my knuckles white with exertion. What should I do? Stop them? In what capacity? Who would believe the words of a useless person, who's been fired from the hospital, has a disabled hand, and a ruined reputation? Aaron would only think I'm jealous, cursing Iris. It might even anger him, and cause me even more trouble. Watch Haley die before my eyes. That girl who once gave me a pure smile. My heart was going through a fierce struggle. Reason told me that self-preservation and indifference were the best choices. This is the Hahn family's calamity, the retribution for Aaron forcing me to sever my own limb. But the faint flicker of medical conscience in the depths of my heart was aching faintly. In the end, reason, or rather, that overwhelming hatred, overwhelmed the faint glimmer of compassion. I closed my eyes, and the image of Aaron coldly forcing me to cut off my wrist, the image of Iris leaning in his arms with a smug look, the image of the overwhelming ridicule and slander against me online flooded my mind. I raised my still clumsy left hand, and looked at the hideous scar on my wrist. Aaron, this is your choice. You chose Iris. You abandoned the person who could truly save your sister. Now you embrace your choice and bear the consequences. I took a deep breath and extinguished the last trace of hesitation in my heart. I opened the left-handed training notebook that I had turned to shreds and continued to perform the tedious and painful precision exercises with my left hand. Outside the window, the autumn wind was bleak. I knew that a surgery doomed to tragedy was about to begin, and I was just a silent spectator. No, perhaps not entirely. I picked up a pen and with my left hand, slowly and clearly wrote a line of words on the blank page of the notebook. Wearing a hat and mask, and dressed in the most inconspicuous clothes, I mingled with the noisy crowd in the outpatient hall, like a very ordinary family member of a patient afflicted by illness. I knew it was risky, but a strong, almost fateful impulse drove me. I wanted to witness firsthand the bitter fruit that Aaron and Iris had personally brewed. The floor where the neurosurgery area was located was heavily guarded, and I couldn't get close. But I found an excellent vantage point. The ventilation window in the stairwell, directly facing the family waiting area outside the operating room. It was secluded here, but the view was clear enough. In the waiting area, Aaron paced back and forth like an anxious caged beast. His usually impeccable hair was somewhat disheveled, his expensive suit was creased, and his face was filled with undisguised panic and vulnerability. At this moment, he was not the resourceful, ruthless Mr. Aaron, but just an ordinary brother afraid of losing his sister. Time passed second by second, each second like an agony. The red light above the operating room had been on for a long time, long enough to make people anxious. Finally, the red light went out. The operating room door was pushed open, and the chief surgeon should have come out first. But the first to rush out was Iris, her face covered in tears, and her surgical gown stained with specks of blood. Her face was as pale as paper, her eyes unfocused, and filled with shock. Aaron immediately rushed forward, grabbed her shoulders, and his voice was hoarse with extreme tension. Iris, how is it? How is Haley? Iris seemed to have been frightened. She shivered violently. Tears flowed even more fiercely. She shook her head, her lips trembled, and she spoke incoherently. Aaron. I am sorry. I don't know how it suddenly hemorrhaged. Couldn't stop it. The location was too deep. The blood vessels were malformed. Her words were like a bolt from the blue, hitting Aaron hard on the head. The color drained from his face instantly, and the hand gripping Iris's shoulder tightened violently, his knuckles turning white. What did you say? What about Haley? What about my sister? At this time, the other doctors and nurses involved in the surgery also came out one after another with heavy expressions. The leading senior anesthesiologist sighed and said in a heavy voice, Mr. Aaron, during the operation, there was uncontrollable bleeding. Although we tried our best to save her life, but the brain was deprived of oxygen for too long, I'm afraid. There is little hope of waking up. Vegetative state. These 3 words hit Aaron like an invisible hammer. He staggered, almost unable to stand. He stared at Iris, the hope in his eyes shattered bit by bit, turning into disbelief, and then into overwhelming anger. Iris! He suddenly grabbed Iris's collar and slammed her hard against the wall with a thump. Completely losing his usual composure, like a lion that had been completely enraged, his roar echoing throughout the corridor. You promised me. You said you were confident. What the hell did you do to Haley? Iris was terrified and cried out in defense. It's not my fault. Aaron, you believe me. The tumor location was too bad. The adhesions were too severe. It was an accident. A medical accident. Accident? Aaron's eyes were bloodshot. Was the preoperative assessment all fake? Aren't you a self-proclaimed brain surgery prodigy? Huh. Is this your skill level? You've turned my sister into a vegetable. The surrounding doctors and nurses looked at each other, none daring to step forward to dissuade him. Iris's cries and shirking of responsibility seemed pale and powerless in the face of Aaron's rage. I stood in the shadows of the stairwell, watching this scene coldly. My heart felt like it was frozen. I couldn't feel the slightest bit of pleasure, only a heavy, almost desolate sense of absurdity. Look, Aaron. This is the price you paid for abandoning me and choosing her. Just then Aaron, on the verge of rage, inadvertently glanced at the corner of the corridor and caught my cold gaze. He froze. In that instant, various complex emotions churned in his eyes, shock, disbelief, and then, like a dying man seeing the last straw, a burst of almost crazy light. He pushed away the still crying Iris and stumbled towards me. Serena! Serena! He rushed to me and grabbed my left arm without saying a word, his strength so great that he almost crushed my bones, his voice trembling violently with excitement and despair. You're here. You must have a way, right? You saved Haley before. You did it even though that time was more dangerous. Save her one more time. Please. Save Haley. He spoke incoherently, his eyes filled with humble pleading, completely different from the angry man just now. I let him hold me, without struggling. The pain from my left arm was far less than the slightest bit of the old scar on my heart. Slowly, with an extremely calm, but icily piercing gaze, I looked back at him. Then I raised my right hand. Slowly, I unwrapped the bandage that had been wrapped around my wrist to cover it up. That hideous, twisted, centipede-like scar was completely exposed to the air, and also exposed to Aaron's eyes. Under the pale light of the hospital corridor, this scar appeared even more ugly and glaring. Aaron's gaze froze on the scar as if he had been burned. The pleading and excitement on his face instantly froze, then shattered bit by bit, leaving only huge, undisguised panic and regret. I looked at his changing expression, and a very faint, very cold arc appeared at the corner of my mouth. Mr. Aaron. My voice was not loud, but it clearly entered his ears, each word like an ice pick, piercing into his heart. Look carefully. This hand. I shook my powerless, drooping right wrist with its terrifying scar. It was you, Aaron, who forced me to cripple it in order to let that crying brain surgery prodigy beside you rise to the top. I turned my gaze towards the operating room, where Haley was lying unconscious. Now, my voice carried a cruel calmness. What am I supposed to use to save your sister? Use this useless hand that can't even untie a bandage? Aaron seemed to have been drained of all his strength. The hand grabbing my left arm suddenly loosened, and he staggered back 2 steps, his face ashen. He looked at the scar on my wrist, then looked at my cold face, then looked at the direction of the operating room, and finally, his gaze landed despairingly on Iris, who was shivering aside. That look was filled with deep-seated resentment and a pain of realizing it was too late. I didn't look at him again, nor did I look at Iris, who was ashen-faced. I slowly rewrapped the bandage, covering the shameful scar. Then, I turned around and walked down the cold stairs step by step. Behind me came Aaron's desperate and suppressed low roar like a trapped beast, and Iris's more panicked cries. The chaos and tragedy in the corridor were no longer related to me. The news of Haley becoming a vegetable, like a boulder thrown into a lake, stirred up huge waves in the already turbulent medical circle. Although Aaron tried his best to suppress negative reports, paper couldn't contain fire, and various rumors spread like wildfire. The formerly infinitely glorious Yanjiang Meimeg had become a living corpse, and the chief surgeon was the newly promoted brain surgery prodigy Iris, whom he had vigorously promoted. The irony and tragic color of this were enough to make all those in the know sigh. Aaron's world collapsed. He was no longer the high-spirited, all-controlling Mr. Aaron he used to be. He became gloomy, irritable, and spent his days outside Haley's ward, his eyes sunken, his beard unshaven, and his expensive suit looked empty and desolate on him. He used all the connections he could think of and spent a lot of money to hire top neurologists from abroad, but each consultation yielded a desperate result. Irreversible brain stem damage. The chance of waking up is less than 1%. Maintaining vital signs is the best option at present. These cold verdicts, like blunt knives, repeatedly cut Aaron's already riddled heart. He looked at his sister, who was being kept alive on a ventilator and nutrient solution. That once lively and lovely girl, who was now only a soulless shell. A huge sense of powerlessness and regret tormented him day and night. He almost completely let go of the hospital's affairs. The vice presidents were trembling, and various problems began to appear within the hospital. His opponents, whom he had once suppressed and squeezed out, were also beginning to stir. And Iris fell into another kind of torment. The failed surgery was a huge stain on her career that could not be erased. Although she tried her best to argue, attributing the reason to rare vascular malformations and unpredictable complications, everyone with eyes could see that, given the dangerous location of Haley's tumor, Iris's forced acceptance of the surgery was itself an extremely irresponsible risk. People in the hospital who used to curry favor with her now looked at her with strange eyes. Colleagues who had been suppressed by her also began to gossip behind her back. Her aura as a brain surgery prodigy quickly faded, and some even privately called her a vegetable maker. She tried to win Aaron back. She dressed carefully, brought a pot of soup to the hospital, and wanted to soothe him with gentleness and consideration. But the current Aaron saw her as if she were a plague god. Get out! Once outside the ward, Aaron knocked over the thermos bucket she handed over in front of several nurses, and the scalding soup splashed all over her. His eyes were bloodshot, he pointed at her nose, and his voice was hoarse like sandpaper scraping. Don't show your face again. Iris, when I see you, I think of Haley lying in there. You harmed her. Iris's face was pale, and aggrieved tears swirled in her eyes, but this time, there was only disgust in Aaron's eyes, without the slightest pity. The strange gazes of the surrounding nurses made her feel even more uncomfortable. She covered her face and fled the hospital in a panic. She knew that she had lost Aaron, the biggest backer, and had almost lost the foundation to stand in the hospital. Panic and unwillingness gnawed at her heart like poisonous snakes. Compared to their suffering, I had entered a strange period of peace in my rented house in the slums. The storms and stresses of the outside world were intermittently transmitted to my ears, through sporadic broadcasts, and the occasional purchase of old newspapers. I knew that Aaron was struggling on the verge of collapse, and that Iris's reputation was tarnished. But these news could no longer stir up too many waves in my heart. All my mind was focused on one thing, training my left hand. Hatred is the fuel, but the monotonous practice day after day is the wheel of progress. I knew that without real ability, all revenge was just empty talk. I threw away the beans and began to challenge more delicate items. Grains of rice, sesame seeds, and finally sewing needles. Under the light, I stretched out my left hand. My fingers were still not as slender and flexible as my right hand used to be. But after months of brutal training, it had shed its initial clumsiness and trembling, and had gained a kind of quiet strength. I held my breath and pinched an extremely thin sewing needle with my fingertips. The tip of the needle shone with a cold light under the light. I tried to control every minute force on my fingertips, aiming the needle tip at a small piece of white cloth held in my other hand. The movement was slow, but exceptionally steady, threading the needle. The tiny thread end slipped off the side of the needle again and again. I was not impatient, adjusted the angle, and tried again. Sweat dripped from my forehead, dripping onto the old wooden table, leaving a small dark stain. The old injury on my right wrist began to ache faintly after maintaining one position for a long time, but I was completely unaware. In my world, there was only that needle, that thread, and that tiny hole that needed to be pierced. Finally, after I don't know how many attempts, the fine white cotton thread accurately passed through the eye of the needle. Success. I didn't cheer, didn't even breathe a sigh of relief. I just pinched the threaded needle with my left hand, held it up to the light, and examined it carefully. The needle was sharp, the thread supple. This was no longer just threading a needle. It was a symbol that the dexterity and stability of my left hand had reached a whole new threshold. Although there was still a long way to go before I could master precision surgical instruments, at least, I had seen a glimmer of hope. I put down the needle and thread and walked to the mottled wall. On the wall, the two names, Aaron and Iris, were still carved there like a curse. I reached out my left hand and gently brushed the two names with my fingertips. The rough texture of the wall touched my fingers. Not fast enough, I whispered to the wall, my eyes cold and firm. Must be faster. Before you are completely destroyed, how can I stagnate? Outside the window the night was deep. But I knew that the darkest moment before dawn often meant that light was about to come. My left hand was ready to face new challenges. And Aaron and Iris's nightmare was far from over. After their backs were against the wall, a deeper abyss awaited them. Several months passed. I had been in this simple clinic in this remote town for quite some time. The conditions here were harsh, and the patients were mostly nearby villagers, with colds and flu, headaches, or some external injuries caused by fieldwork. For me, who once specialized in the most delicate brain surgery, these ailments were simple to the point of being tedious. But this was exactly what I needed. I started over with my left hand, from the most basic consultations and prescriptions, to wound cleaning, suturing, and injections. At first it was still clumsy, especially suturing. The feeling of holding the needle and forceps with my left hand was completely different from my right hand. The brain needed to re-establish a set of nerve reflexes. Fortunately, the villagers were simple and honest, and were quite tolerant of me, a doctor from the city whose hand seemed a little inconvenient. Gradually, my left hand became more and more skilled. The stitches were evenly spaced, and the surgical knots were firm and standard. I even began to try some more complex procedures with my left hand, such as simple abscess incision and drainage. The old doctor in the clinic went from initial suspicion of this helper, to later showering me with praise. I lived under an assumed name, severing all ties with the past. No one here knew who Serena was, let alone the past of the brain surgery prodigy. I was just a silent, strange doctor whose left hand was more flexible than her right. Calm, but not numb. The two names on the wall, the scar on my wrist, constantly reminded me of the hatred in the distance. I knew that Aaron and Iris's torment was far from over. Haley's situation was like a ticking time bomb. Sure enough, on a sultry afternoon when a rainstorm was about to arrive, the clinic's tattered curtain was suddenly flung open. A tall, but abnormally haggard and disheveled figure rushed in, covered in dust and dampness from the outside. It was Aaron. He had lost a lot of weight. The suit that used to fit him was now hanging loosely on his body. His eyes were sunken, his beard was stubbly, and his hair was disheveled. He was nothing like the Mr. Aaron of the past. His eyes were bloodshot, a kind of madness and humble pleading on the verge of collapse. His gaze swept across the simple clinic, finally locking on to me. At that moment, an indescribable light burst out in his eyes, like a drowning man finally seeing a floating straw. "Serena," he said, his voice extremely hoarse, with the weariness of travel and a fragility I had never heard in him before. "I finally found you." There were still several villagers waiting to see the doctor in the clinic, all curiously looking at this disheveled man who suddenly broke in, and whose temperament was out of place with his surroundings. The old doctor frowned. "Sir, please queue if you want to see a doctor." Aaron ignored him completely. He rushed to my examination table, slammed his hands on the surface, leaned forward, and stared at me, breathing rapidly. "Serena. Haley is dying." I was using a rather deep cut on a villager's arm to practice left-handed suturing, the needle tip steadily piercing the skin. Hearing his words, my left hand did not tremble in the slightest, perfectly tying off the knot and cutting the thread. The whole process was smooth and flowing, as if the Haley he mentioned had nothing to do with me. I signaled to the somewhat nervous villager that it was okay, and then slowly raised my head to meet Aaron's bloodshot eyes. My eyes were calm and unwavering, as if I were looking at a stranger. "Mr. Aaron," I said calmly, "this is a clinic. Please be quiet." My calmness obviously stimulated him. He became even more agitated, almost roaring. "Quiet? How can I be quiet? Haley's brain tumor has grown again. It's compressing her vital centers. She could die at any moment. Iris, that useless thing. She can't do anything. All the experts say there's no hope." He grabbed my left wrist on the table, his grip frighteningly strong, his voice with a sob and a final plea. "But I know. Serena, I know you can. You're the only one in the country who can operate on that location. You saved her once, please save her again. As long as you can save Haley, I'll agree to any condition. Hospital? I'll give you the hospital. Money? All my money is yours. Or do you want my life? I'll give it to you. As long as you can save Haley." He was incoherent, his posture so low it was in the dirt. In the past I might have softened, but now looking at him like this, I felt only a cold desolation in my heart. Slowly, but firmly, I pulled my left hand out of his grip. Then under his desperate gaze, I raised my right hand. Slowly, I untied the wristband that I wore year-round to cover it. The hideous, twisted scar, like a centipede crawling on my wrist, was completely exposed to the dim light of the clinic, and also exposed to Aaron's eyes. The color of the scar had faded, but its very existence was the sharpest accusation. Aaron's gaze seemed to have been burned by a hot iron, and suddenly froze on the scar. The pleading, agitation, and despair on his face instantly solidified, then shattered piece by piece, leaving only a huge, undisguised panic and overwhelming remorse. I looked at his drastically changing expression, my eyes without a trace of warmth. Mr. Aaron, my voice was not loud, but like an icicle, each word clearly stabbing into his ears, and also into the hearts of the villagers and the old doctor who were listening with their ears pricked up. Look carefully. This hand. I shook my powerless, drooping right wrist with the terrifying scar, my tone terrifyingly calm. Is what you, Aaron, forced me to ruin so that your not useless Iris could take my place. My gaze swept across his pale face, turned to the gloomy sky outside the window, as if able to penetrate time and space, seeing the critically ill girl in the hospital. Now, my voice had a very slight, yet enough to send chills down one's spine ridicule. What do you want me to save your sister with? With this, I raised the left hand that had just finished suturing, and was now naturally drooping, my tone understated, but every word pierced the heart. Perhaps even holding the suture needle is not yet very stable left hand? Aaron seemed to have been drained of all his strength, stumbled back 2 steps, knocking over a shelf holding medicine bottles. The sound of shattering glass was ear-piercing. His face was ashen, his eyes empty, looking at the scar on my wrist, then at my cold face, and finally, his gaze desperately cast to the gray sky outside the door. He opened his mouth, as if trying to say something, but ultimately no sound came out. Only a hoarse, difficult wheezing, like a broken bellows, came from his throat. Huge remorse and despair engulfed him like a tide. He finally understood completely that his cold decision back then not only destroyed me, but also personally cut off the last chance of survival for his sister. He staggered around, like a shell that had been sucked out of its soul, dejectedly, stepping shallow and deep, walked out of the clinic, disappearing into the increasingly dense rain curtain outside the door. The clinic was silent. The old doctor and the villagers looked at me, their eyes complicated, with sympathy, with curiosity, but more with shock. I lowered my head expressionlessly, picked up a new suture needle and thread again, and said softly to the next waiting villager, "Come on, where are you feeling unwell?" As if the appearance of the collapsed man just now was just an insignificant hallucination. But I knew that Aaron's search and despair meant that Haley's time was really running out. And Iris, the culprit, what would she do? I skillfully cleaned the patient's wound with my left hand, my eyes cold. Aaron disappeared like a wandering soul into the rain, and the clinic fell into a strange silence. The old doctor opened his mouth, but in the end just sighed, shook his head and continued to tinker with his herbs. Several villagers exchanged glances, curious but afraid to ask more. I remained expressionless and continued to see the next patient with my left hand. My fingertips rested on his rough wrist, feeling the throbbing of life, but my heart was a frozen wasteland. Aaron's collapse and pleas were like stones thrown into still water, stirring up only a slight ripple before quickly sinking. I knew he would be back. As long as Haley had a breath left, her brother would not give up. But for me, the ending was already predetermined. From the moment he forced me to cut off my wrist, Haley's fate had been sealed. Iris's madness merely accelerated the process. On the other end of the city, outside the VIP ward of a top private hospital, the atmosphere was suffocatingly oppressive. Aaron returned dejectedly, soaked to the bone, with mud on his suit and hair plastered to his forehead, looking disheveled. He leaned against the cold wall, slid to the ground, ran his hands through his hair, and emitted a suppressed, painful whimper. The destruction of his last glimmer of hope brought a despair even deeper than before. Iris cautiously approached, holding a cup of hot coffee in her hand. "Aaron, where did you go? Drink something to warm up." She tried to show tenderness, but her voice trembled almost imperceptibly. Haley's condition was deteriorating, and she was more panicked than anyone. Once Haley died, Aaron would never let her go. Aaron suddenly looked up, his bloodshot eyes staring at her, like a wild beast choosing to devour. "Get out!" He knocked the coffee away, the scalding liquid splashing all over Iris, and the porcelain cup shattered on the ground with a jarring sound. "It's all your fault." He stood up, stepping closer and closer, his voice distorted by extreme anger and despair. "If it hadn't been for you encouraging me back then, if it hadn't been for your incompetence, how could Haley have become like this? Now she's about to die. Are you satisfied?" "Huh." Iris was so frightened by his appearance that she retreated repeatedly, her back hitting the cold wall, with nowhere to escape. Tears streamed down her face, and she frantically argued. "Aaron, you can't blame me entirely. It's Serena. She's the one who refused to save her. She could save her, but she won't. She's taking revenge on us. She's letting her die." "Revenge?" Aaron laughed as if he had heard a ridiculous joke, his laughter shrill and desolate. "Iris, look at me." He grabbed her chin roughly, forcing her to look into his bloodshot eyes. "You tell me, who was it who personally destroyed the hand that could save people? Who was it who forced her into that remote corner of the mountains?" "It was me. It was you. It was us." Each of his words was squeezed out from between his teeth, carrying bloody remorse. "It was us who cut off Haley's lifeline. And now you still have the nerve to push the blame on her." He suddenly let go. As if touching something dirty, the disgust in his eyes almost solidified. "Iris, if anything happens to Haley, I'll make you pay with your life." These murderous words made Iris cold all over, and she collapsed to the ground. She watched Aaron's resolute back leaving, fear like countless cold hands gripping her throat. She couldn't sit still and wait for death. Haley had to live. At least she couldn't die while she was in her charge. A crazy and risky idea sprouted and spread in her heart. Since Serena wouldn't help, since all the experts had declared her dead, what if? What if she, Iris, could turn the tide? If she could risk another surgery, even if it was just to temporarily stabilize the situation, or even if Haley eventually died, but as long as she showed a posture of trying her best, blaming the failure on the fact that the condition was too severe and beyond help, maybe Aaron's anger wouldn't be completely poured out on her? Maybe she could have a chance of survival? This was a gambler's all-in bet after losing their senses. She was forced to the edge of a cliff, and there was only this seemingly risky path to escape from death. In the simple clinic in the remote town, I had just seen off the last patient. Outside the window, the night was dark, and the rain was still falling. The old doctor was packing up, hesitating to speak. "Dr. Serena. That man today." "An insignificant person," I interrupted him, my voice calm, and began to skillfully clean, disinfect, and categorize the instruments with my left hand. The movements were smooth and natural. This hand could now perfectly handle all the work here. But I knew that this was far from enough. Late at night, I locked the door of the clinic and returned to the small living quarters behind. Several of the latest foreign medical journals were spread out on the table, which I had asked someone to bring from the city. They contained the latest research progress and surgical case discussions on tumors near the brainstem. I turned on the lamp and used my left hand to pick up a pen and record the main points in a notebook, sketching a schematic diagram of the surgical approach. Under the light, my left hand was steady and strong, and the tip of the pen scratched on the paper, outlining precise and clear lines. Revenge requires strength, and my strength comes from knowledge and technology. Haley's tragedy confirmed Iris's fragility, and also highlighted the importance of absolute strength. I can't just be content with suturing wounds in this small clinic. I must stand up again, stand even higher than before. I knew what was happening in the outside world. Aaron's despair, Iris's desperation. All of this was sliding towards an inevitable tragic end, and I just needed to wait patiently, waiting for their empire to begin to collapse from within, waiting for the day when my left hand truly possessed the power to control everything. I closed the journal and blew out the oil lamp. In the darkness, only the scar on my wrist ached faintly in my memory. And pain is the best medicine to keep people awake. Iris stood in front of Haley's bed, looking at the not-so-stable waveform on the monitor, her palms cold. She knew this was her last chance. If Haley died under her care, Aaron's anger would burn her to ashes. "Prepare for surgery," she ordered the medical team behind her, her voice with an imperceptible tremor. "Dr. Iris, the patient's condition is very unstable right now. The risk of another surgery is extremely high, almost. A senior anesthesiologist tried to dissuade her. I said prepare for surgery. Iris turned around suddenly, her eyes with the madness of an all-in bet. I am the attending physician, and I'll take responsibility. Are we just going to watch the patient die? No one dared to speak again. Aaron was not there, and Iris was still nominally the director of neurosurgery. The lights in the operating room were lit again for Haley. But this time, the atmosphere was far more solemn and oppressive than the last time. The medical staff participating in the surgery did not have the solemnity of welcoming the challenge on their faces, only an overwhelming worry and fear. They all knew that this was almost a suicidal charge destined to fail, and the surgeon was forced to the edge of a cliff, dragging everyone else into the adventure. Iris put on her surgical gown and gloves. The cold touch sent a shiver down her spine. She took a deep breath, trying to regain her usual confident and composed state, but the panicked eyes in the mirror betrayed her. Her hands were trembling slightly. She clenched her fists forcefully, forcing herself to calm down. Begin, she gave the order, raising her voice deliberately to hide her inner weakness. The scalpel cut the scalp, exposing the skull. All the steps seemed to be proceeding step by step. But when the skull was opened and the intracranial situation was seen, everyone involved in the surgery felt their heart sink. The tumor was worse than the images showed. Not only had it grown, but because of the previous failed surgery, the surrounding tissues were severely adhered and edematous, the anatomical structure had become blurred, and fragile blood vessels were like spider webs spread over the surface of the tumor. The slightest touch could trigger a catastrophic hemorrhage. Cold sweat instantly broke out on Iris's forehead. She realized that she had no way to start. The tumor was like a devil's fruit covered in barbs, deeply embedded in the forbidden zone of life. Blood pressure is dropping. Oxygen saturation unstable. The monitor began to emit a piercing alarm. Stop the bleeding. Stop the bleeding now. Iris's voice was tinged with tears as she frantically tried to control the situation. But the more flustered she became, the more distorted her movements. The electrocautery hook in her hand accidentally snagged a small artery. Instantly, blood gushed out like a breached dam, quickly flooding the surgical field. Crap! It's a branch of the basilar artery. Suction. Maximum power. The operating room was thrown into chaos. The suction device couldn't keep up with the surging blood, and the surgical field was a sea of red, making it impossible to see anything. Iris stood frozen before the operating table, her face as white as paper, the instrument in her hand clattering to the floor. She stared at the glaring red, her mind blank. It's over. Everything is over. The news reached the small-town clinic the next afternoon. A villager buying cold medicine casually mentioned big news he'd heard from relatives in the city. Heard the hospital director's sister died during surgery yesterday. Operated on by that famous female doctor. TSK, what a tragedy. My hand, reaching for the medicine, paused almost imperceptibly. Then I continued to wrap the weight herbs, my expression calm and unperturbed. How much Dr. Serena? 3.5. The villager paid and left with a sigh. I walked to the clinic door, looking at the gray sky outside. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained gloomy. Haley is dead. That once bright and smiling girl had ultimately died because of her brother's stupidity and the greed and incompetence of the one she loved. I closed my eyes, and the image of Haley calling me Sister Serena, Aaron's desperate pleas on his knees, and Iris's hypocritical face flashed through my mind. There was no sense of satisfaction and revenge, only a heavy, cold stillness. This was the inevitable outcome. From the moment Aaron chose to betray me, the wheels of fate had been turning in this direction. Iris's madness merely accelerated the process. Now, one of the important characters on the stage has left the scene early. So how will the remaining actors perform this final act? I turned and returned to the clinic, continuing to wipe the gleaming medical instruments. Left hand steady. Intentional injury, causing serious harm. The evidence was irrefutable, and Aaron didn't even try to defend himself. He was quickly arrested, tried and sentenced to 3 years in prison. The once glorious director and neurosurgery expert were now one behind bars and the other a cripple, receiving psychiatric treatment in the hospital, completely disappearing from the public eye. Their empire collapsed in an instant. As for me, I stayed in the small-town clinic for another year, using my left hand to heal the sick and save the wounded. My reputation gradually spread throughout the surrounding villages and towns. But I knew this was not my final destination. After Aaron went to prison, I left the small town. I used my savings, along with the prize money I'd received from anonymously publishing several papers on left-handed neurosurgery over the years, to go to a top medical research center abroad. It had the most advanced equipment and the most open academic atmosphere. No one knew about my past. They just saw me as an exceptionally hard-working and gifted left-handed surgical researcher. I studied and trained voraciously, focusing on left-handed minimally invasive neurosurgical techniques, especially the removal of difficult brain tumors. After the most rigorous training, my left hand became more steady and precise than my right hand ever was, because it carried not only technique, but also deep-seated hatred and the will to be reborn. 3 years passed in the blink of an eye. I earned international acclaim for my outstanding achievements and several groundbreaking demonstration surgeries. Ghost hand. That's what they called me, because my left hand operated as fast as a ghost and was unbelievably precise. I came back. I was hired as the director of the neurosurgery center at an international hospital, even more prestigious than Aaron's. The media flooded with reports of my return, calling me a medical miracle and a legend of the left hand. My past was dug up, but the version had been completely twisted. I was a hero who had been framed, forced to sever my own wrist, but had risen from the ashes with amazing perseverance. I readily gave interviews, never avoiding the past, but simply stating the facts in a calm tone. Public opinion was overwhelmingly on my side. Aaron and Iris became a negative example that everyone reviled. Aaron's release from prison went almost unnoticed. 3 years in jail had dulled all his edges. He looked much older than his actual age, his eyes were clouded, and his gait was unsteady. The world had changed dramatically, and there was no place for him. He tried to regain some of his past resources, but everyone avoided him like the plague. He rented a simple room and barely eked out a living doing odd jobs. Until one day, a severe headache and blurred vision knocked him down. The test results came back. A brain tumor. The location was identical to Haley's and even worse. Ironic? Of course. In desperation, he saw a report about me on television. On the screen, I was wearing a white coat, calmly and confidently explaining the latest neurosurgical techniques. My left hand skillfully manipulating 3D images. The reporter called me the hope for countless brain tumor patients. Hope. The word was like a final ray of light shining into his dark abyss. It was also like the most vicious curse, reminding him of what he had personally destroyed. He frantically found the hospital where I worked, recklessly barged into my office, and knelt before me. Serena. Dr. Serena. Dr. Serena. He looked up, his face streaked with tears and deep remorse, his voice broken. I was wrong. I was really wrong. Please save me. It was all my fault. I'm not human. Please for the sake of our past relationship, for the sake of my being punished enough, save me. I don't want to die yet. I sat behind my large desk, watching him calmly, watching him grovel on the floor, like a dog wagging its tail for pity. The once arrogant Mr. Aaron was now only left with a primal fear of death. I said nothing, but slowly extended my left hand. This hand, steady, strong, with clearly defined knuckles. It had once been unable to pick up beans or hold a spoon, but now it could perform the most delicate surgeries in the world. Then I raised my right hand. On my wrist, the hideous scar was still clearly visible, like an eternal judgment. I watched his face turn ashen, watched the despair rise in his eyes, and slowly opened my mouth, my voice so calm that it lacked even a trace of emotion. Aaron, look. This left hand that saves lives, and this right hand that you personally crippled. They are both here. But, I leaned slightly forward, my gaze as sharp as a scalpel, piercing his soul. I can save the world, but I will never save you. Take your regret and your brain tumor, and go down to Haley to repent. Aaron collapsed completely on the ground, like a pile of mud. All his pleas, regrets, and fears turned to nothingness under my cold pronouncement. He knew this was the final end. I had given him the most complete despair. Letting him see the hope of life, and then clearly telling him that this hope would never be related to him. I pressed the call button. "Security, please escort this gentleman out." Two tall security guards came in and dragged the distraught Aaron out. He didn't struggle, but stared blankly at the ceiling, making meaningless guttural noises. The office returned to silence. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the bustling traffic below. Sunlight shone through the glass, illuminating the white coat sleeve on my left hand, bright and warm. My revenge is complete. My path continues. I gently stroked the scar on my right wrist with my left hand. The scar remains, but I have been reborn. The moment Aaron was thrown out of the hospital gate, the sky was leaden gray, like a dirty rag, pressing down from above. He slumped on the cold cement ground, beneath him a sticky puddle of sewage, exuding a sour stench. His expensive suit, the one he wore when he went to prison 3 years ago, now tattered and stained, was completely ruined, but he couldn't feel it. The brain tumor was like an invisible hand, churning wildly inside his skull, his vision blackening in waves, accompanied by violent nausea. Heh, heh. He opened his mouth, but could only make the sound of a broken bellows. Serena's last sentence was like a red-hot iron, branded into the depths of his soul. "Take your regret and your brain tumor, and go down to Haley to repent." The hope of life was within reach, but completely cut off by the evil he had sown many years ago. This despair was more cruel than death itself. He didn't know how he got up, or how he staggered back to the rented room in the dirtiest corner of the city. A small room of only a few square meters. The walls were moldy, the windows broken, barely covered with plastic sheeting, the air forever filled with the mixed smell of cheap tobacco, sweat, and rotten food. There were 2 other tenants in the room. A migrant worker who had broken his leg on the construction site and couldn't get compensation, drinking and cursing his mother all day long, and an old man who was mentally confused, often muttering to the air. This was the boil under the shiny skin of the city, the final resting place for trash like him. The headaches became more frequent and more intense. Painkillers had long stopped working. Each attack felt like countless steel needles were stabbing deep into his brain from behind his eyes, making him want to bang his head against the wall. His vision was severely blurred, and everything appeared double. He tried other hospitals, but when he registered and sat in the doctor's office, and stutteringly spoke his name and condition, the doctor across from him would often show a look mixed with surprise, contempt, and a trace of fear. "Aaron? Are you the one? I'm sorry, your situation is too complicated. Our hospital's technology is limited, so I suggest you go to a better hospital." A better hospital? Where was better? He knew that Serena's hospital was the best. And his name, Aaron, had long been notorious in the medical community, a taboo, a plague. No one would be willing to take on a patient who had been explicitly rejected by Ghost Hand, Serena, especially one with such a wonderful past. He was turned away from all decent hospitals. He could only go to the oldest, most dilapidated community clinics to get the cheapest, almost ineffective painkillers. The clinic doctor frowned, looked at his distorted, painful face, and eventually just shook his head and prescribed some placebo-like medication. The money ran out quickly. The meager savings he had brought with him from prison quickly dwindled after checkups and medicine purchases. He had to find a job. But what kind of job could a man who had been in prison, had a criminal record, was not young, and was likely to fall ill at any time find? Finally, through a fellow villager's extremely reluctant introduction, he went to work as a porter in an underground black workshop. The working environment was extremely harsh, the air was polluted, and he had to carry heavy chemical raw materials. The foreman knew his background and beat and scolded him at will, and it was common practice to withhold his wages. "Damn it, hurry up. Lollygagging, do you think you're still that big hospital director?" The foreman spat a mouthful of thick phlegm at his feet. Aaron lowered his head, gritted his teeth, and endured the throbbing pain in his head and the fatigue in his body, struggling to move forward. Sweat, dust, and the occasional nosebleed, a symptom of the tumor pressing on his brain, mixed together, making him look filthy. Once, while carrying a barrel of corrosive liquid, a severe headache suddenly struck. His vision went black, his hands went weak, and the barrel fell to the ground, the pungent liquid splashing out, corroding his pants and leaving a burning scar on his calf. The foreman rushed over and started kicking and punching him without saying a word. "Waste! Pay up. You can't afford to pay for this barrel even if you sell yourself. Aaron curled up on the ground, clutching his head, letting the fists and feet rain down on him. He could no longer feel the pain in his body, because the pain in his brain was worse. He was just thinking, if only. If only he hadn't forced Serena. There was no if only. Retribution. This was retribution. He lost his job and completely lost his source of income. He couldn't even afford the rent for that filthy room. He was kicked out by the landlord, and could only live on the streets. During the day, he rummaged through trash cans for food, fighting with stray dogs. At night, he huddled in bank ATM lobbies or under bridges, shivering from the cold. When his headaches struck, he rolled on the ground, banging his head against the cold pavement or walls, emitting beast-like wails that drew disgusted and fearful glances from passers-by. Crazy person. Stay away, bad luck. He became a living, slowly decaying zombie in this bustling city. Occasionally he would wander, dazed, near the hospital where Serena worked. Across a wide road teeming with traffic, he looked at the magnificent, clean and modern building, watching the doctors and nurses in white coats and the hopeful patients entering and exiting. It was a place where lives were saved. And he, just across the street, was in hell. He could see on the huge electronic screens, sometimes playing footage of Serena giving interviews or academic reports. She wore neat professional attire, or the sacred white coat, her eyes calm, confident and composed, her left hand gracefully making presentations. She had saved so many people and received so much honor and respect. And he, Aaron, was like a rat in the gutter, waiting for death in the stench and pain. This extreme contrast was Serena's most cruel form of slow slicing torture on him. One night, a cold wave struck and snow fell heavily. Aaron huddled behind a leaky billboard, his lips purple from the cold, his consciousness blurred. The headache struck fiercely again, this time accompanied by violent vomiting and convulsions. In the moment before his consciousness completely faded into darkness, he seemed to see his sister Haley. Haley, wearing a beautiful dress, ran towards him with a smile, calling out, "Brother." Then the image shattered, turning into Serena's indifferent gaze and the blood splattering when Iris's wrist was severed. The next morning, sanitation workers found the stiff body under the billboard. The man was huddled, his face contorted, as if he had endured great pain. The cause of death was intracranial hemorrhage due to a ruptured brain tumor, combined with severe hypothermia. No one knew who he was. The police came, took pictures, made a record, and then treated it as an unidentified corpse. A few days later, a short piece of social news occupied the smallest space on the corner of a newspaper. Unidentified man freezes to death on street, suspected homeless person. No name, no identity, no one cared. Like a speck of dust, silently dissipating in the wind. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, I had just successfully completed a difficult brain tumor resection. I took off my surgical cap, revealing my smooth forehead, my left hand as steady as ever. 5 years later, under the spotlight of the International Neurosurgical Academic Summit, I raised the golden trophy, my platinum wedding ring on my left hand shining along with the trophy. I dedicate this award to all those who are reborn in desperate situations. Below the stage, my husband, a top medical journalist who met me because of a report exposing medical scandals, was holding our babbling daughter, his eyes full of pride. During the post-conference interview, a reporter asked sharply, "Dr. Serena, do you feel vindicated by Aaron's ending?" I looked at the camera, my eyes as calm as water. I no longer look into the abyss. My battlefield is the operating table, my happiness is with my family.